After repeatedly asking the US for a few of their MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile Systems, ATACMS for short, Ukrainian forces will finally be getting this long-awaited upgrade to their arsenal. In September, military officials in Washington confirmed they will be sending as many ATACMS over the coming weeks as the US could reasonably spare. And as of mid-October, these high-tech surface-to-surface artillery weapons have been making an impact. But how? In what way? Why are these missiles so crucial for Ukraine compared to other weapons? Let's find out. While offering a special thanks to his friends at the White House recently, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky added that the missiles have more than proven themselves during a pair of synchronized nighttime attacks. Zelensky said that the ATACMS were used against two military airfields, one in Berdyansk and the other in the Luhansk region, a dual strike that resulted in significant losses on the Russian side, including 9 military helicopters, an anti-aircraft missile battery, and an ammunition storage depot. Bolstered by their recent upgrade from Washington, Ukrainian officials have stated plainly that with these new weapons at hand, there will be nowhere left for Russian troops to hide within Ukraine's internationally recognized borders. This pair of attacks was executed shortly after Russia launched a surprise attack on the town of Avdiivka in eastern Ukraine, encompassing 3 battalions comprised of some 2,000 troops, along with dozens of armored vehicles and a handful of jets providing air support. This would turn out to be the largest assault carried out in this area so far. But this was only the latest flare-up of the ongoing contest for the much-contested municipality of Avdiivka, considered by both sides to be the gateway to the city of Donetsk, the capital of Ukraine's eastern Donbas region. Avdiivka not only has significant strategic importance, but the town has been the stage for many frontline battles since Moscow annexed Crimea 9 years ago, essentially triggering the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Since then, the town has been heavily fortified, making it extremely difficult for Russian troops to establish a foothold there. This has also turned the town, which had a pre-war population of nearly 32,000, but is now down to around 1,600 residents, mostly living in basements and other sub-ground dwellings, into a symbol of the Ukrainian people's unflinching resistance. Ukrainian defensive positions in Avdiivka have allowed its forces to resist repeated Russian attacks, at least for now. At this point, losing this territory would be a tough blow for Ukraine, both strategically and in terms of morale, especially after this summer's highly anticipated counteroffensive resulted in only marginal gains. So why is Biden giving ATACMS to Ukraine such a big deal? Well, for one, Ukrainian forces have so far been able to fend off dozens of attacks, so it will certainly be interesting to see how the arrival of ATACMS missiles on the battlefield shifts the advantage. And for two, the ATACMS will undoubtedly play a crucial role on the battlefield, as Kyiv continues to ramp up its assaults on Russian-occupied areas of Crimea. Recently, Ukrainian forces have expanded their attempts to undermine Russian forces, including the launch of a devastating attack on a Russian naval base in Sevastopol back in September that damaged a ship and a submarine and injured 24 people. And more recently, there was the destruction of the 2 Russian landing crafts by Ukrainian sea drones, an overnight operation that was part of a series of escalating strikes on the peninsula. Ukraine insists that the strikes on Crimea, which have mostly targeted Russian naval bases and vessels, are a critical element of their overall counteroffensive strategy. Ultimately, they want to make it impossible for Russia to continue its assault on the Ukrainian mainland, and in the process, Kyiv is hoping to land a few strategic and symbolic blows against Russian forces, which the ATACMS should certainly help with, as focus shifts back toward Crimea. The escalation of attacks across Crimea began after Russia allowed the Black Sea Grain Initiative to lapse this past July, a globally crucial deal that has allowed Ukraine to export grain by sea. Previously, foreign container ships were allowed to bypass Russia's blockade and navigate safely to Turkey's Bosphorus Strait, then onto global markets. Ukraine's uninterrupted export of grain is vital for stabilizing global food prices and bringing relief to many developing countries. The impact this war, and certainly the collapse of the Black Sea Grain Initiative, has had on global food markets has been disastrous, especially given that Ukraine is a major supplier of food to the World Food Programme, WFP, an international organization within the UN that provides food assistance across the globe. At a glance, Ukraine's contribution makes up 10% of the global wheat market, 15% of the corn market, and 13% of the barley market. It's also a key player in the world's sunflower oil market. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization (FAO), another organization within the UN, as many as 47 million people could face serious problems in terms of food insecurity as a result of this war. And now, with Russia's Black Sea Fleet resuming its blockade of Ukraine's ports, vital grain exports are being prevented, creating a direct threat to global food security, what Zelensky has simply called another attempt by Russia to weaponize hunger and destabilize the global food market. This situation has left Ukraine eager to secure its position in Crimea, which has meant, along with their missiles and drone strikes, a stepping up of their clandestine operations as well. Recently, in the occupied city of Luhansk, a car explosion killed pro-Moscow former head of police, Mikhail Filipenko. Representatives of Ukraine's defense intelligence have claimed responsibility for the apparent assassination, saying it was a joint operation carried out with pro-Ukrainian partisans, before issuing a warning of retribution to other pro-Russian officials positioned in occupied areas. There was also, quite recently, the bombing of a Russian train outside the city of Ryazan, about 196 kilometers (122 miles) southeast of Moscow. Placed on a section of track, the improvised explosive device derailed 19 freight cars and caused several injuries. And though Kyiv hasn't officially taken responsibility, that hasn't stopped the Kremlin from making the accusation, citing a series of recent cross-border strikes by Ukrainian forces and their allies. The question seems to be now, other than the success they've already had, how will Kyiv make the most of their new weapon? Ukrainian forces were already familiar with the wheeled M142 high-mobility artillery rocket system, a mobile rocket launcher commonly known as the HIMARS, that are used to carry and fire ATACMS. Up until now, though, the US had only been supplying shorter-range guided rockets, fired from a HIMARS mobile launcher, or a tracked M270 multiple launch rocket system, or MLRS. The longest-range variants of the ATACMS can strike targets out to a distance of 300 kilometers, 190 miles. This extension of their reach will more than likely allow Ukrainian forces to launch attacks further into Russian-held territories, including the Crimean Peninsula and other areas bordering the Black Sea. So you might be wondering, besides its impressive range, what's the big deal with ATACMS? Well, to start, most of these 4-meter-long missiles carry a WDU-18 230 kilogram, 500-pound blast fragmentation warhead. They can travel in excess of Mach 3, around 3,700 kilometers, 2,300 miles per hour, and, depending on which variant you choose, they can cost between $820,000 and $1.7 million apiece. The impressive speed of the ATACMS compared to similar cruise missiles, such as the UK's Storm Shadow or Russia's KH-101, has been one of its key selling points, and is due largely to the fact that the ATACMS is, essentially, a ballistic missile with a rocket engine strapped to its back, which makes them very hard to shoot out of the sky. Okay, so if these high-tech precision missiles come with a rocket engine on the back, what comes at the front? When it comes to the payload carried on the ATACMS, you've really got two options. One is a unitary warhead, which is basically what it sounds like, a single explosive charge. The other is a submunition warhead, a container filled with lots of submunitions or bomblets. These are also mostly what they sound like, a bunch of little bombs that can be dispersed over a large target area. In terms of ATACMS, this means hundreds of steel-cased balls filled with incendiary pellets. So which one is better? Well, it largely depends on your intended target. Unitary warheads are better for destroying specific targets, say a stationary tank, ammunition depot, or a large artillery piece, while submunition warheads will be more effective against moving targets, say a convoy of vehicles or an advancing column of troops. Both warhead variations have been designed with specific target categories in mind, but both can be highly effective against a wide variety of individual targets too. The ATACMS platform also comes with a number of variants, though it's not 100% clear which one President Biden ended up passing on to the Ukrainians. The most widely produced variant is the M39 Block 1, which was added to the US's arsenal in 1991. The original design for this variant had a range of 25 to 165 kilometers, 15 to 100 miles, and carried a payload of 950 incendiary bomblets, each about the size of a baseball and weighing around 0.6 kilograms. And when dispersed above a target, these bomblets can cover an area of 33,000 square meters, 360,000 square feet. Although no longer in production, about 1,650 of the M39 Block 1 variants were made, with several hundred of those being used in combat during both Operation Desert Storm and Operation Iraqi Freedom. All remaining missiles have been modified to carry a unitary fragmentation warhead. But this hasn't been the only variant to be used in combat over the years. With nearly double the range and a GPS-aided guidance system, the M39A1 variant can reach targets anywhere from 12 to 185 miles, 20 to 300 kilometers away, but carries a somewhat smaller payload of just 300 incendiary bomblets. Entering the US's arsenal in 1997, some 610 of these were produced, with around 74 being used in combat, primarily during Operation Iraqi Freedom. This variation is no longer in production, and all remaining units have also had their cluster munition payloads swapped out for a single warhead. Arriving in 2001, the M48 variant, a quick-reaction unitary missile with a GPS-aided guidance system, carries a single 230-kilogram (500-pound) high-explosive warhead and has a maximum range of 185 miles (300 kilometers). It should be noted that when a fragmentation warhead, like the one found on this variant and many others, explodes, the blast sends thousands of metallic fragments flying in every direction, much like a 360-degree spray of bullets. Between 2001 and 2004, 176 M48s were produced, 16 of which were used during Operation Iraqi Freedom, while another 42 appeared in combat during Operation Enduring Freedom. The remaining missiles are in the possession of the US Army and Marine Corps. Then there's the M57 variant, which is similar in many ways to the M48, mainly in its ability to carry a single high-explosive warhead out to a distance of some 185 miles or 300 kilometers. Going into production directly after the M48 went out, a little over 500 of these were made, but only 33 have been used in combat, reportedly during Operation Enduring Freedom. The M57 is also very accurate, boasting a circular error probability (CEP) of less than 9 meters or 30 feet. Typically expressed as a radius, CEP is an important measurement for assessing the accuracy of guided munitions, such as missiles. CEP and missile accuracy in general can be influenced by a range of factors, including guidance system technology and environmental conditions. So essentially, the smaller the CEP, the more accurate the system is considered to be. Let's say, for example, a missile has a CEP of 20 meters. This means there's a high probability, usually greater than 50%, that the actual point of impact will be within a 20 meters radius of the intended target, which means that an M57 ATACMS missile, fired from, let's say, Brussels, Belgium or Dunkirk, could reliably hit the Eiffel Tower, as well as a range of smaller targets located at the same distances. Which brings us to the last variant we're going to look at, but certainly not the least, the M57A1, which is basically identical to the M57 in terms of general specifications and capabilities, except for one major difference. The warhead found on this variant comes with an adjustable blast height, allowing for a wider dispersion of bomb fragments should the situation call for it. After looking more closely at the ATACMS, we can definitely conclude that it has superior speed, range, versatility, accuracy, and explosive power than any other surface-to-surface missile on the market. Its most notable feature, however, might just be the mobility of the system from which it's launched. Because the ATACMS can be launched from a mobile ground vehicle like the HIMARS, which they're already familiar with, Ukrainian troops can easily shoot and then move over a variety of different terrains. Ukrainian combatants can hide if necessary. They can avoid retaliatory attacks. And most importantly, they can create a sense of uncertainty for the Russians, who won't be able to predict where the next strike might be coming from. In practical terms, this means that a Ukrainian mobile artillery unit traveling in an ATACMS-equipped HIMARS could stop basically anywhere, anytime, and launch a precision attack on a target it would take them perhaps 5 to 6 hours to drive to, if they could reach it by land at all. Clearly, Washington's gift of the ATACMS has opened up a range of strategic options for Ukraine's perpetually outnumbered forces, options that could lead to plenty of scenarios where Ukraine has a significant battlefield advantage. The arrival of the ATACMS could very well allow for easier destruction of Russia's air defense systems, airfields, and other military installations deep within the enemy's territory, as we've already seen Ukraine do when they recently used their new missiles to wipe out a pair of Russian air bases. In the wake of this recent news, many of Ukraine's supporters have been quick to applaud Biden's generosity. But it's also important not to get carried away here. Old Uncle Joe didn't just happily hand over a bunch of his precious ATACMS the first time Zelensky asked for them. The folks in Washington have actually been quite hesitant to do so, and for two pretty good reasons. One, there's the risk that significantly increasing Kyiv's fighting ability might also increase the tension between the US and Russia. And two, the US also had its own national security needs to consider, as its stockpile of ATACMS, which have been out of production since 2017, has continued to dwindle. The latter issue, however, keeping enough ATACMS on hand to balance its own security needs with those of Ukraine and Europe as a whole, seems to have been mostly resolved by the recent arrival of a suitable replacement, and it is fancy. In March 2016, Lockheed Martin and Raytheon Technologies announced they'd be working in tandem to develop a missile that would meet the US Army's replacement requirements. This new missile, if it would indeed end up shouldering out the ATACMS, would need not only advanced propulsion, allowing it to fly faster and farther, it would also need to be thinner and sleeker. For what purpose, you ask? So that the loadout could be increased to 2 per pod, doubling the number of missiles that could be carried by the HIMARS or tracked by the M270 MLRS. Well, the Army ultimately got what they wanted, introducing the Precision Strike Missile, or PrSM for short, which has reportedly left production and will be entering US stockpiles in the near future, if it hasn't already. The PrSM, which would ultimately be developed by Lockheed Martin, is at the leading edge of long-range precision strike missiles. With an equally cool-sounding name compared to the ATACMS, this next-generation surface-to-surface weapon uses enhanced attack capabilities to neutralize, suppress, and destroy targets at a distance of 310+ miles, over 499 kilometers. On top of increased range, lethality, in-flight survivability, and missile loadout, the PrSM also comes with an advanced cluster munition warhead comprised of preformed fragments. While the PrSM development program started out as a competitive effort between Lockheed and Raytheon, Raytheon would end up withdrawing from the competition in early 2020 due to technical issues that delayed their missile's flight test. The original intent of both companies was to reach a maximum range of no more than 499 kilometers, due to restrictions outlined in the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, signed by former President Ronald Reagan and former Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1987. Among other restrictions, the INF Treaty prevents signatories from developing missiles that can travel 500 kilometers or more, but these limitations went out the window in August 2019, when former President Donald Trump decided to withdraw from the treaty. This decision came after more than a decade of accusations, coming from both the US and Russia, that the other had violated the terms of the treaty. And so, with a brand new long-range precision missile in their arsenal, and who knows what variants on the way, the only thing that will stop Washington from providing ATACMS to Ukraine was Russian President Vladimir Putin's uncertain reaction. In short, he wasn't pleased. So far, Putin has said that the US providing Kyiv with ATACMS was a big mistake, and that the US is wading deeper and deeper into a conflict the Russian leader believes is none of its business. Previously, Putin called the delivery of ATACMS to Ukraine a red line that the US had better not cross. Yet he's also stated that the ATACMS will not make a significant difference on the battlefield, that Russian forces will have no trouble repelling attacks, and this intrusion by the US will only serve to prolong this war and bring more suffering to the people of Ukraine. But this isn't the first time Putin has brought up the subject of long-range missiles. When Russia initially marched more than 100,000 troops to the border of Ukraine, 2 months before they invaded, the Kremlin also sent NATO a list of demands that was structured as more of a one-sided treaty, along with the articles insisting that NATO both shuts its doors to new members and remove all its forces from the 14 countries that joined after the Soviet Union collapsed. One article declares that no land-based missiles be deployed to areas that would allow them to reach any territory belonging to Russia. Technically, the missiles haven't gotten closer, their range has just increased, but still, this was the red line Putin was referring to. But now that it's been crossed, the Russian president doesn't seem overly concerned. This could be because he was expecting it, or because the delivery of the ATACMS, however significant their future impact could be, is only a small part of a much larger delivery from the US, a delivery that's come to exceed $76 billion in humanitarian, financial, and military support, which has been offered to Ukraine by the Biden administration and the US Congress since the war began. While dozens of other countries have also provided large aid packages to Ukraine, including most members of NATO and the European Union, the US has really taken the lead. So far, the US has delivered surveillance and attack drones, coastal defense ships, satellite communications equipment, and advanced surveillance and radar systems. They've sent over hundreds of Abrams tanks and artillery pieces, thousands of Humvees and other tactical vehicles, tens of thousands of rockets, missiles, and various other munitions, not to mention several types of anti-aircraft missiles, including 12 National Advanced Surface-to-Air Missile Systems (NASAMS), and 1 Patriot Air Defense Battery plus munitions. And on top of 35,000 grenade launchers and small arms with ammunition, other extremely helpful but less publicized items the US has sent to Ukraine include night vision and thermal imagery systems, laser rangefinders, C4 explosives, explosive ordnance disposal equipment, M18A1 Claymore mines, cold weather gear, and generators. Breaking down the numbers, around $3.9 billion, or 5% of the total, has gone to humanitarian aid, in the form of emergency food assistance, healthcare, and refugee support, among other resources, while another $26.4 billion, or 34%, has gone to financial and budgetary aid via loans and the Economic Support Fund, an economic assistance fund used to advance the US's political and strategic interests by helping allied countries meet their political, economic, and security needs. And the rest of that $75+ billion, that's all gone directly or indirectly to weapons, ammunition, and military equipment. Nearly a quarter of the total, around $18.3 billion, has been allocated for security assistance in the form of training, equipment, weapons, and logistic support provided via the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, a program initiated by the US Department of Defense with the intention of providing help to Ukraine by enhancing its defense capabilities and mitigating certain security challenges, mainly a Russian invasion. Another $23.5 billion worth of weapons and military equipment has come directly from the DoD's personal supply. And still another $4.7 billion has come in the form of grants and loans for weapons and equipment via the Foreign Military Financing Program, another US initiative, this one providing grants and loans to nations so they can purchase weapons, defense equipment and services, and military training from the US through government-to-government sales. Long before crossing Putin's metaphorical red line with his delivery of ATACMS, Biden also stirred up the hornet's nest, as well as some international controversy, when he agreed to furnish Ukraine with cluster munitions, which most countries have banned due to the increased risk their use poses to civilians by 1. Their lack of precision, and 2. The danger of undetonated ordnance being triggered accidentally later on. Still, a number of analysts in the West have asserted that the assistance offered by the US, as well as its allies, has been crucial in Ukraine's continued defense, and has even created the opportunity to launch a number of critical counteroffensives against Russia. Some analysts, as well as many supporters of Ukraine, also believe the country's failure to expel Russia will result in the subjugation of millions of Ukrainians, while simultaneously fueling Putin's ambitions to recover territory that once belonged to the former Soviet Union, which might also end up encouraging China to pursue or enhance similar aggressive tactics, which means military support for Ukraine will likely continue. To a significant degree, though it has certainly not been alone, the US has led the world in offering security assistance to Ukraine. Their javelins have halted Russian tanks during their savage assault on Kyiv. Their air defense systems have intercepted Russian strikes aimed at Ukrainian infrastructure. The US has also provided financial and humanitarian assistance, which has helped Ukraine maintain highly fundamental services such as healthcare and heat. Many NATO members, including the US and other allied nations, have, too, been cautious about getting directly involved in the conflict, being concerned primarily with Putin's not-so-subtle threats of starting a nuclear war. As we've seen, however, governments across the world have overcome their initial hesitancy and provided Ukraine with increasingly sophisticated assets, including battle tanks, modern fighter aircraft, and now, high-tech, long-range precision missile systems. But what do you think? Has the US crossed a line by sending ATACMS to Ukraine? Should NATO and its allies simply stay out of it? Are we inching closer to a global nuclear conflict instigated by Russia? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more military analysis from military experts.